those decisions being made, at this point, I really just need to take the shirt and cut it apart. So that's what I have done. And I cut, I don't rip, but I always make sure that I'm cutting on the same side of the seams. So here you see, I cut on the back side of the shoulder seams. I knew I wasn't going to use this neckline treatment at all, so I could cut right through that at the shoulder seams. And here I am on the final side seam. I'm going to cut, as I did on the other one, right along the back side of this side seam. Here you can see that I have taken the back of the t-shirt and I folded it in half exactly. Now we still have the original hem, and I have laid on the medium size pattern from my Terrific Tee. The goal here is to get the armhole. So do you see, it's just going to make it, and this is for the size medium. So I will also need to cut right along here at the shoulder, and then this higher neck that I have come up with. If in doubt, I always cut higher rather than lower, because I can always lower something. I want to leave the fabric there. And this original tape line here was where I thought the original neckline might be. So I could even come up here and cut, because if this were a seam line, I would have had to allow a seam allowance up past that. So that's what I'm going to do. Watch here. I've left more fabric up at the neck than I might want, because I can always cut it down later. And then here along the armhole. Now see how this comes up here? It's not going to make any difference. I'm simply going to come along here. Here then you see me doing the same thing with the front pattern. So as I lay the front pattern on the t-shirt, which I have folded in half, and by the way, just be prepared when you fold pieces of ready-made garments in half. Do not expect the edges to meet everywhere, because they're just not going to. That's one reason I love to work with knits. Now I'll need to have the side seams be the same length. So do you see here, if I set this pattern there, then you see my side seams of the back that I've already cut and the front are going to match. So here's what I'm going to be trimming off at the armhole and here across the shoulder seam. All right, and then we'll deal with the rest of this in a minute. Now, from here to here, about the width of my nail, here's the garment and here's the center front of the pattern. So this garment is really going to be less around because the front is a little skimpy. But that's okay, it's a knit, it can stretch. So I'm not going to panic over that. So I have cut the armhole. You can see that I've clearly cut the double notch indicating the back. And I will also snip in here to this dot, because what I'm going to be doing eventually is laying open this sleeve and cutting the same sleeve head on the sleeve of the original garment to follow the pattern for the sleeve that's with this pattern, so that I can put the sleeve back into this armhole. Remember, the original t-shirt had kind of a sloppy lower dropped armhole. I haven't cut the sleeve open yet because I haven't made a decision regarding the cuff. So if in doubt, don't do it. Just wait until you make a decision about that part. Now, if you look very close here, you'll see that I have part of the seam allowance still left here from the original garment. That's okay. In the end, that will get trimmed off, trimmed down when I trim down my seam allowance from reinserting the sleeves. And this is a knit, so remember, you're fine. It can stretch a little bit to meet where it needs to go. And I left this taller neckline. Again, I'm just not sure. I'll figure that out when I put it on my dress form. Original hemline, it's already in. Maybe I'll have fabric that goes over top of it. That's how I usually work, maintaining the original garment at the bottom. but I always want to recut a good armhole and shoulder seam because I would integrate the fabric that goes on top in the same way that this tissue is on top in with the garment at the armholes and the shoulder seam. All right, so here's where I'm at. I decided to go ahead and cut that border print off of the skirt piece. Here I have it. I pressed this edge under, and I honestly didn't mean to cut on this side, but I started to, and so I did. So this much of that print, I decided to hold to that line that I had taped. I had it up on my dress form. So allowing for 1/2 of an inch from this side of the tape, I cut this out. And I also made sure that the distance here on the shoulder equaled the distance here on the shoulder. It occurred to me that, you see when the collar part comes around, that is going to kind of equal in width this. So that makes sense to me. And here's our inspiration with that full collar ending about here with this look with our buttons. Now looking at this, I personally do not like that line because I think it makes your hips look bigger. It's pointing to the hips. Instead, I'm going to take that line and go from the center up at the side seams. I think that's far more flattering. Other thing is that, do you see this fullness in here? I'm going to take some of the fabric, this base part of the fabric, and cut that not on straight grain but off grain so that I can let it flow from the shoulder and the armhole and in this area, but likely more free, attached to some of the same fabric at the back, not sewn into the t-shirt at the side seam, so that it can drape as we see there. And I'll probably do the same thing with some fabric here. The other thing that I realize is that I have enough of this border in another print to go horizontally across the yoke in the back. That's how far I am now. So you see, I had to come to a point where I had to start cutting. You can't make all the decisions at once, at least I never can. I just have to decide on an idea and then commit to that idea. Next, I'm going to have to decide if I'm really going to cut in and make these actual seams in the garment. But remember, it was a little shy going around the front anyway, so I may be just doing this on the top instead of actually seaming it in and then stitching through everything along here and along here. Yeah, that's probably how I'm going to handle the construction. About a half hour has gone by and this is what I'm up to. I had cut the neckline and I had cut the strip of the border print from the skirt. So you can see that's what's going down here. And then part of the excess part of the left, we talked about this flattering line going from low at the center front up at the side seam. That's kind of a principle of French cut panties on the French cut line on a swimsuit or on your panties. It's just flattering. It's going to make the leg look long. So the first thing I did was take the rest of the skirt, or a good piece of it, and I cut it the same here at the shoulder and around the armhole, but I laid it a little cattywampus on the fabric so that it's going to drape like this. And the other reason that it's draping in that manner is because, see here I've got it end at the side seam. See, I cut more width in it here at the bottom. It's kind of like an A-line skirt. That's why it's draping. There's more width and it's not on the straight grain. So those are the reasons it's draping. I have no idea at this point how long it's going to be, what the hemline's going to be, but I allowed plenty of length down there because I can always shorten it. I've pinned on the original sleeves, and I'm thinking, yeah, I'll just leave the sleeves plain. I might put something at the cuff, just not sure. And now I really need to add in that collar of the butter-colored suede. It's a straight piece, so in order to figure out how long to cut that straight piece, I've got a tape measure here. I'm coming up around the neck, back around. Now, of course, I want it to be too long rather than too short. So I'm gonna cut a rectangle that's 32 inches long, right? And plenty wide because I want it to scrunch. Here I am cutting that butter colored suede, the collar, as we said, 34 inches long. This is the straight grain, this is a selvage, and I decided to cut it very wide. It's 12 inches wide. This is not a complete bias, as you can see right here. It's just going along the inch square, but pretty close. So I have this big piece here that will scrunch up and work around that collar. So let's see what that might look like. Here I am with this long 12 by 34 inch piece of the butter suede. What's going to happen is, you see, it's going to start underneath here at the right side of the V and then go around the neck, overlapping some tucks on this side. And that's where those buttons will go, which will visually tie in with the width of this strip of that border print. Here's a garment on which I did that same treatment. This garment can be found in my Upcycle Memento Tops pattern, and it's this one right here. And that was all inspired by a garment that I saw in an airport little clothing boutique shop. On this one, it's just a piece of the lace onto which I stripped. I sewed strips of ties, of knit. I just had to give it a haircut because it goes through the wash. But see how it just all scrunches in? And then I carried through the idea of the tie labels here on the outside. This is just raw. More tie labels down here. Hemline, just for interest. And let me show you the back. Very interesting with using tie labels. This was actually the sleeve cut out and opened up across the back to create the yoke. So just an idea, sharing something else that I've created. I wear this top a lot. It's more spring, summer than fall, winter, but I really love it. The sleeves had gotten a little snug. I did some new sleeves towards the end of last year. This is a garment that goes into the wash, but hopefully not the dryer, although sometimes it does end up in the dryer when my husband does the wash. So back to our current garment. Now the next thing to decide is how and where I'm going to bring this butter suede in some piping or something down into the garment itself. Basically, I've done my planning and I've done some cutting. At this point, I also know that I have enough of the border print. So here's where I'm at on the back. And very honestly, I've just come to a place where I'm not sure, so I'm gonna stop for the day. I've got the border print across the yoke. I have enough of this that I can go diagonally there. On the front, at the bottom, in both halves, I've got this fabric. So I could eke out drapey this fabric with some of that butter color going straight down here on both sides. And then it will be basically a knit top with drapey over the top of it. And I think that's the direction I'm going. I just don't know if I want to cover all this up at the back, because if I do, then I've ended up with the navy t-shirt showing at the front right, the left as you look at it, and the sleeves. So that's 1, 2, 3 places. Yeah, I think that's probably the direction that I'll go. But when I get tired at the end of the day, it's time to just quit. When I don't sleep, I might think on it a little bit. That's where we're at. We'll see what tomorrow brings.